Rabbi, your thing's off mute.
I love when that happens.
I feel like it's back to that time with the class, and you're like, okay, no questions.
No
Okay, no
questions.
questions. We're like, no, no,
Nobody wants to say anything.
you're on mute.
Okay, well, we hear me now. So we're going to now switch over to the opposite coast, to to the East Coast. It's 10:30 by you guys. Can't believe you're still awake. And
Can't
I get to hear
can't believe it either.
we hear
Also
some.
to Benji's family, also it's pretty late for them.
Well, everybody wants to hear Benji, so we're going to
We can
hear
hear you, David.
some insights
Don't
into
forget the
the.
other good ones that are on the East Coast.
That too,
Oh,
Figgy. That
oh
too.
boy.
I'm here. I did not go unnoticed by those jokes.
Okay. So, very good. So we're going to hear from Benji speaking about the custom of eating dairy on the Shavuot. Benji, take it.
Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I wanted to start by kind of going through like a variety of different reasons for why we eat dairy on Shavuos. And then at the end, I'm going to touch upon some like halachic ramifications, and it will even throw in some fun facts. So the Ramah says, well, when the Ramah speaks about this minhag, the Ramah himself begins he begins by saying that it seems to be to me. He says venereally. See, even the Ramah is saying that like when it comes to eating melachik on Shavuos, like there's no one clear reason for this minhag. Like the background of the minhag seems to be very vague, and hence the fact that we have at least like 7-8 reasons, probably a lot more than that. It reminds me kind of a concept we have when we're learning Gemara. If you have a question and that question is answered by 6 questions, so we say the reason why you have 6 questions, no one answer like truly answers it appropriately, so therefore you have 6. So to here we're saying there's kind of like there's a vague background for what the reason is, so there's all these different suggestions. I've also heard that like the word tam, which is reason in Hebrew, it also means taste. So like all of these reasons give you like more of a taste of what like the real reason is, but it's just like a flavor. Like we don't know for sure. Like we don't fully understand the reasons, but it gives us kind of an idea, and each one adds a flavor to it. So without any further ado, I'm going to start going into some of those reasons. And the first one I think is probably one of the most like classic ones. So I believe it's like quoted by the Mishnah Brura. So the first reason is that after Matan Torah, when the Jews like accepted the Torah, so they found out that they have to slaughter animals, they have to shech the animals in a certain way, and their pots have to be kosher. So that they weren't able to eat meat yet, so therefore they had dairy. So that's like the classic reason given. But interestingly, like there's more to be said for this reason. Like if you do like a deeper dive into this reason. So I just want to give credit where credit is due. First of all, I want to thank Rabbi Rosenberg for coordinating this. And like a lot of the reasons I found, there's this amazing article on Aish called like, I think like Reasons for Eating Dairy, written by Rabbi Shraga Simmons. It's like a lot of what I prepared came from him. Also some of it came from OU Kosher, some of it came from Chabad. Surprisingly, one of them came from Jamie Geller, which is like a from like a person who writes like recipe books. Like she wrote one reason that I hadn't seen elsewhere, so I thought that was interesting. So the question is, okay, so we just said that the Jews would have to shech new animals and they'd have to kosher their pots in order to have meat. So why couldn't they do that? So we see from the fact that they couldn't do that, that Matan Torah happened on Shabbos. And the next question on this is, okay, so we explained why we can't have meat. We actually wouldn't be able to have milk either if it was Shabbos, because in order to milk animals, it's one of the rabbinic prohibitions of something you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So like the Torah prohibition that's related to is called dash, threshing. It was related to like one of the malachos, one of the things done in the Beis Hamikdash, where in order to prepare like wheat to make like the shtei halechem. I'm sorry, not the shtei halechem. Shtei halechem is only on Shavuos. That's coming up. But I believe the lechem apanim that was weekly. So the lechem apanim, I think the translation would be the face breads. They were the 12 loaves that were in the Beis Hamikdash, and they were famous for like keeping like fresh and hot from week to week. So basically, one of the preparatory stages was just like preparing the wheat, like crushing the husks and the shells in order to get out the kernels of wheat. So milking a cow is related to that prohibition because we're getting the milk out of the cow. It's called mifarek, which I think literally translates to unloading or taking apart. So the question is like, why are you allowed to, why were they allowed to milk on Shabbos? Like what we said, they couldn't prepare the meat, but they also shouldn't have been able to milk. So the answer is, yes, they weren't allowed to, but they already had milk prepared because they had milk ready to give like to their baby animals. So therefore they had milk. And when they found out they couldn't have meat, they were able to have dairy. So that's the first reason. And like I said, this was quoted, I believe, in the Mishnah Brura. So also like Aish gives like a couple sources for each of the answers that I got from them. So it also mentions like Gemara Brachos, and there's a sefer, I believe Ha'elef L'cha Shlomo B'Rabbi Shlomo Kluger. Interestingly, another reason comes from his sefer as well. So that's the first classic reason, but there are a bunch of other reasons as well that I want to go into. And we're also going to kind of circle back to this first reason when we talk about like the fact that they had dairy right after receiving the Torah because they couldn't have meat. There's actually going to be a question later, like how they were allowed to have dairy. Okay, so the next reason that I prepared here is a verse, a pasuk in Shir Shirim, that says that the Torah is compared to milk and honey. So an explanation given is just like milk for an infant, like milk alone can fully provide all the nutrition that an infant needs, so too the Torah provides all the spiritual nutrition that a Jew needs. And an interesting thing that I saw on this reason, I forget which website I saw it on, but it's the Chok Yaakov quotes a Kobo, that it says, based on this reason, not only do we see like a source for having milk and dairy on Shavuos, we also see a source for having honey, because the pasuk in Shir Shirim compares milk and honey to the Torah. So I feel like this is something people aren't as aware of. There's also minhag to have, there's a custom to have honey on Shavuos. Okay, so the next reason is a gematria, like a numeric valuation for the word chalav, the word milk. Ches is 8, lamed is 30, beis is 2. We have any accountants on the Zoom, they could tell us the grand total here is 40.
And nothing from him.
So the total of chalav is 40. So I saw like a couple relations to 40 when it comes to the Yontif Shibuyas. Number one, like Moshe spent 40 days on Har Sinai, like learning the Torah directly from Hashem. There's another 2 sets of 40 days, like when Moshe went up to beg forgiveness for the Egel Azav was another 40 days. And then when he received the new Luchos was 40 days. Another really interesting one is it says there are 40 generations from Moshe who recorded the written Torah until Ravina and Ravashi, who wrote the final version of the oral Torah, and that was the Gemara. They were the ones that completed the Talmud 40 generations later. So we have this relation to 40 related to like the Talmud, obviously that's part of the Torah, and related to Moshe receiving the Torah from Har Sinai. That was the third reason. The next one is an interesting reason brought by the Zohar. So if anyone like questions about why we have Melechik on Shavuos, not only do we have many reasons, but there's also Kabbalistic reasons for it. So definitely there's what to stand on. So according to the Zohar, we know there are 300, well actually I didn't know this, but there are 365 negative commandments given in the Torah. I have the 613 mitzvahs, 365 of them are things that we're not meant to do. And the Zohar says each of the 365 days of the year is related to one of these negative commandments. So which one is related to the day of Shavuos? So there's a pasuk that talks about Bikurim. As the rabbi just mentioned earlier, one of the names of Shibuyas is Chag HaBikurim. So the pasuk that talks about Bikurim talks about bringing the first fruits to the Beis Hamikdash to thank Hashem for the yield from our fields for that year. So the first available opportunity to do that is Shibuyas. And the later part of that pasuk says that one should not cook a baby goat in its mother's milk. And this is actually the source for it's one of the main sources for not mixing milk and meat. So from the fact that first we're talking about a mitzvah related to Shavuos, and then we talk about that negative commandment. So the Zohar says that's the commandment that's related to Shavuos Day. That's the negative commandment. And that's one of the reasons why we specifically will have like a meat meal and a milchik meal, a dairy meal, to show that we're following this negative commandment by making sure we keep them very separate. It's interesting. Some of the reasons brought are not just reasons for having dairy, but it's reasons for having milk and meat, like separate, obviously separate meals, but having both of them. There are going to be other reasons that touch on that also. And I also saw that brought down, I forget who it was brought down by, the Darchei Tshuva. This I got from the OU's website. The Darchei Tshuva says that the primary way to follow this custom is simply by having like a dairy kiddush. Like you make kiddush and you have something dairy, and then afterwards you have a meat meal. Others say that it's fine to just like have a regular milk meal and you don't have to have a meat meal. That's kind of like a machlokas that I'm going to try to get into later if we have time. But continuing with some of the reasons here. So the end of this reason of the Zohar, he explains that in order to have two separate milk meals where we're going to have bread, you have to have two separate loaves of bread. And interestingly, one of the things that happened special on Shavuos was there was a carbon called the Shtei Alechem, which was two loaves of bread that were brought. And there's actually like one reason, like specifically given by this. It says that because like there's this concept of having two loaves of bread on Shavuos because of the Shtei Alechem. So one way to ensure that we'll be forced to have two separate loaves of bread is to have milk and meat. Because if you have a loaf of bread that's on a table while you're having a meat meal, because we're concerned that maybe some meat substance splashed onto the loaf, making it fleshik. So therefore, we say if you want to have a milk meal later, you have to have a separate loaf of bread. So one reason given for the dairy is specifically it's because we want to have two loaves of bread, and we see from this reason that it's not just a concept of having milk; it's a concept of having both meals. So we'll see some of the reasons are like specifically talking about dairy, and some of them are saying specifically to do milk and meat. So far we touched on 4 reasons. The 5th reason is that one of the names given for Har Sinai is Har Gavnunim. Gavnunim literally means like majestic peaks. It's mountain and majestic peaks. But if we look at the letters in the word Gavnunim, it's very similar to the word Gavina, cheese. So that's one reason given. And like another like aspect to this reason is Gavina has the numerical value of 70. And there's like a concept that they're Shivim Panim LeTorah. There's 70 faces to the Torah, meaning there's 70 different ways in which the Torah can be understood. It's like another reason why we would have like cheese on Shibuyas, because Shibuyas is the holiday when we receive the Torah. So being that the Torah has this connection to 70, so therefore we have Gavina, we have cheese, which has the numeric value of 70. What? Oh, and additionally, Shane actually gets the credit for this one. Another concept of 70 related to Shavuos, we have the Shivim Zakanim, the 70 Zakanim. As we know from Pirkei Avos, like they were part of the chain of the Masorah tradition of passing the Torah down to the generations. That's another connection to Gavina, to 70. Okay, so the next reason I have here is related actually to kind of to Pesach. It's related to Mitzrayim and like the beginning of the Galus, of the Exodus of Egypt, when Moshe was born. So Moshe was born on Zayin Adar, on the 7th of Adar, and his family was able to hold him for 3 months, actually, because he was born 3 months prematurely. Like the Egyptians were calculating when all the Jewish boys were going to be born in order to track them down and throw them into the Nile. But because Moshe was born 3 months early, he was able to be hidden in the house for 3 months. And then after that, he was put into the Nile. And on that day, we know how the story goes, that Paro's daughter found him in the Nile. And then she wanted to nurse him, except he would only nurse. She discovered after trying to get multiple people to nurse him that she needed to get someone Jewish. So she went and actually hired Yocheved. It turned out to be Moshe Rabbeinu's mother, who ended up getting paid to nurse her own child. And the day on which this happened was Vav Sivan, was Shibuyas. And we see this connection to milk. Hashem did not want Moshe having milk from a non-Jew, even though for an infant there wouldn't necessarily be any prohibition against this, but because Hashem was going to be talking directly to Moshe, and I didn't see this, but also Moshe would be receiving the Torah from Hashem, so therefore Hashem was careful that Moshe shouldn't nurse from non-Jewish from a non-Jewish person. Okay, so far, for those who are counting, we had 6 reasons so far. So I'm going to do a few more, but I also want to mention some other things related if we have time. So I may not go through all the reasons. Okay. Oh, so this next one is actually related to the first answer that was given. The first answer, which is the one quoted in the Mishnah Brura, explains that we said that they had no pots and that they couldn't slaughter the animals because it was on Shabbos and therefore they had to have milk. But now a question is brought up: how are they allowed to have milk? In addition to the question we answered of how they're able to milk animals on Shabbos, we said that they didn't. But additionally, even before the Torah was given, there's something called the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, the 7 Noachide laws, which is the 7 laws that everyone must keep. The Jews kept it before the Torah was given. And if a non-Jew wants to follow the Jewish tradition, they would keep these 7 laws. And one of them is something called Aver Minachai, that there's a prohibition against eating apart from a living animal. Aver literally means limb. But this could more loosely translate to anything that comes from a living animal, which would seem to indicate that having milk from an animal which is alive would be an issue. It would be a prohibition of Aver min Achai. So how is it that the Jews were able to have dairy? So the answer given is that yes, up until the Torah was given, they weren't allowed to have any milk because it was considered having apart from an animal while it's still alive. However, once they were given the Torah, and in the Torah is written a pasuk that describes Eretz Yisrael as flowing with milk and honey, and obviously the Torah wouldn't mention something which is forbidden to us. So we learned that from when the Torah was given, milk became permitted. So it's fascinating. At the same exact moment when the Jews found out that they couldn't have any meat because the meat they had wasn't kosher, and they couldn't prepare any new meat. So at that moment, it became permitted for them to have dairy and milk because once the Torah was accepted, they were able to have milk, even though technically it would be considered Aver min Achai. And I saw that there was another question on this, and I believe this reason also was on Aish's list. They had 7 answers there, I believe. So the next part to this answer, the question is, so if milk was forbidden before the receiving the Torah, how is it that Avram Avinu served milk to his guests? Well, we see when the 3 Malachim came, Avram Avinu served them milk. So the answer is that there are 2 different ways of explaining Aver min Achai. Like, as I said earlier, like literally an Aver would be a limb, but more loosely translated, it would even include milk, because that's a part from a living animal. But the differentiation is, one moment. I believe the differentiation is that for a non-Jew, that it's specifically for an Aver that consists of either bones or sinews that would be forbidden, but like milk, which obviously has no bones or sinews in it, it would be okay. So this type was the type forbidden to non-Jews, but a non-Jew would be allowed to have milk. It's interesting. I just realized this now. I know, like, when we talk about the story with Avram Avinu and the 3 Malachim, like there's a big discussion of whether Avram actually knew that they were angels or not. So it seems like he recognized that they were non-Jews because only a non-Jew would be allowed to have this type of Aver min Achai. Although I guess angels have different laws also, so it really doesn't tell us one way or another. Like, according to no opinion did he think it was Jews. He either thought it was Arabs or angels. So I take that back. And this reason of the milk becoming permitted to us on Shibuyas, and therefore we commemorate that by having milk. This reason was the second one I saw quoted by Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, who has a sefer called Ha'elef L'cha Shlomo. So he has 2 reasons given for dairy on Shibuyas. Okay, so I want to mention one other reason that's actually related to something we just brought, the story with the 3 angels and Avram Avinu. So this is actually the one brought, I saw it, I don't know the source, but the website I saw it on was Jamie Geller, who's like a Jewish cook. So she mentioned that one of the reasons related to having dairy on Shibuyas is to actually like differentiate us from the angels. When Hashem wanted to give us the Torah, the Malachim are like, well, why are you giving something so precious to human beings? Like, you should keep it up here with us. So we know, like, Moshe Rabbeinu had like a whole back and forth explaining, like, he asked the Malachim, like, angels, do you have parents that you have to honor, or do you have to keep the Shabbos? But another thing that differentiates us from the angels is when Avram Avinu had the 3 angels over, they had milk and meat together. Avram Avinu served them milk and meat, and they ate it. And yet we keep all the laws of kashrut, but we keep all of these laws. So to commemorate this idea that like we were, so to say, more deserving than the angels to receive the Torah, so we have a milk and a meat meal. I think this is another source for having both, and to show like how we're scrupulously separating them. So I did mention earlier that I had like I had seen a fun fact. It was on a different Aish article. So I mentioned earlier that there's this pasuk that talks about how Eretz Yisrael is referred to Eretz Chalav v'Davash. So it was talking about like in modern day, and obviously like bringing up Israel with everything going on now. Please God, like everyone should be safe, and the situation should improve. But I saw like some very interesting things about like milk production in Israel. I'm just going to pull this out because I definitely do not remember this by heart. But the Israeli Holstein breed of cow is a cow that was developed in Israel. Because based on the Israeli climate, apparently, like if they had other cows, which have other types of milk, it wouldn't be as suited for Israel. So leave it to Israel. They developed their own breed. It's called the Israeli Holstein. Additionally, Israel is recognized as having the highest national milk yield yearly, 11,281 kilograms of milk per year. And they also have like some cutting edge technology for monitoring, recording, data, managing the feeding of these cows, the production of the milk, and genetics. And apparently also like Israel has been like recognized internationally for their sheep and goat milk as well. So that was just a fun fact to throw in. The article I saw was also talking about something called Gavina Levana. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But it's a type of cheese that apparently is like very popular in Israel that's not really readily available elsewhere in the world unless I guess it comes from Israel. Okay, so getting back to the idea of having dairy on Shibuyas. So I saw some interesting like halachic ramifications of if we're going to be having a milk meal on Shibuyas. So like I said earlier, there are two different ways it could be done. You could have like a dairy kiddush followed by a meat meal, or you could go and have just have the dairy meal. So I saw something very interesting that in order to do like the idea of having it for kiddush first, there's this idea that we're meant to have a kazayas, like an olive portion of either something grain-based or some sort of bread or grape juice by this kiddush. So like I saw brought down, I think it was on the OU website, it was mentioning how a lot of cheesecakes, even if they're mizonos, they may not have a kazayas worth of flour in them. A lot of them are like heavily like cheese and cream cheese based. And it mentioned like that some of them may not even be a bracha of mizonos, because if it contains flour, but the only reason for the flour being there is that it's a binding agent and it's not really adding any flavor, so then you wouldn't make a mizonos on it. So that's just something to be aware of. And I also saw like on that OU website, there's an amazing article. I believe it's titled something like Dairy on Shibuyas, written by Rabbi Avram Gordimer. So one of the things brought down there's a big machlokas between the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch versus the Bach and the Mishnah Brura as to whether there's even like an idea that we have to have meat meals on all the holidays. So for all those who really like prefer a dairy meal, according to the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, nowadays when we don't have the carbon shlamim, which was a carbon that was brought on the holidays, so that carbon shlamim was one of the main reasons why there's this concept of also having meat. Additionally, there's an idea that like happiness is had through meat. However, according to the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, that the idea that we have like an obligation to have meat on the holidays is only at the time when the Beis Hamikdash was standing, but nowadays one should have for the meal like whatever they prefer. And then according to the Bach and the Mishnah Berurah, which are also pretty widely accepted, they hold that like one should have a meat meal. So according to them, one would, even on Shibuyas, they would first have that Melech Kiddush and then have the meat meal. So there definitely are other reasons out there, but I feel like we gave like a little bit, like I mentioned earlier, a bit of a time of a flavor of like why we have dairy on Shibuyas.
Nice job. Good job. Yay.
Good job. Good job.
Very nice. Thank you.
That was very